Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kanban for Everyone. I am Colleen Johnson, your host today. And today I am joined by the amazing Steve Tendon. Welcome, Steve. Welcome to the show.
Hello, friends of Herbie. And if you don't know who Herbie is, you will by the end of this broadcast.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you here. I have to say, we've been working a little more closely over the last couple months. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and getting to know more of the TameFlow community. And you broke all of our records today with attendance numbers for this session. So I think everyone else out there is just as excited as I am to talk to you today about not just TameFlow, but economies of flow, theory of constraints, and of course, Herbie. I would love, for you to take a moment before we dive into all of these questions. We've got lots of great questions that we've already populated from the Pro Kanban Slack community. You will have a chance to ask Steve all of your questions in the chat here for the live stream. But let's just start with TameFlow. You are the creator and founder of TameFlow. Can you give our listeners a little bit of background about TameFlow and what led you to create it?
Well, it's a long journey, the development of these ideas that eventually became TameFlow, the TameFlow approach, as I call it. But it's way back to the late 80s and early 90s. I started with Borland International as a software engineer. Borland was an amazing, outstanding, exceptional company known for the performance of its products, but also in particular for the incredible organizational performance. This was so outstanding that it caught the attention of AT&T Bell Labs that were running a decade-long project, the Pasteur project, studying the what made high-performing software teams. And Borland was identified as the extreme outlier in terms of productivity. Later, even gentleman called Jeff Sutherland, the creator of Scrum, claimed that the Borland engineer was like 50 times more productive than a Microsoft engineer. Now, we might now discuss if that holds or not. But the interesting thing was that this project, the Pasteur project, published a paper that also profoundly influenced Sutherland. And he led him to incorporate elements into Scrum, like the daily stand-up, the Scrum Master, and the product owner roles. So I say, having been there in that period when the study was done, I gained like this deeper understanding of what really worked and what Scrum might have not really understood and might have gone astray. This project, the Pasteur project, was very peculiar because it did not focus on processes, as you would expect from an engineering company like AT&T, but they focused on the relationships between roles in the company. So the human aspect, the human factor, and eventually this thing evolved into organizational pattern theory. And these patterns could be used to describe recurring structures in the companies, but also to predict organizational performance. So this is where it all started. And I became a scholar of these patterns. I became fascinated by the so-called unity of purpose pattern. Of course, it means what you think. If you have a shared purpose, it leads to better performance. But making it happen was really, really hard. And in this attempt at chasing, how do you make this pattern happen, I stumbled across the theory of constraints, which claims that a single constraint limits the overall system performance. And I discovered this through David Anderson's book of 2003, Agile Management for Software Engineering. And this idea of a constraint was so important for me because it was like a unifying concept where the company could focus all energy, all attention on one point. So it helped me to create the unit of purpose. But David Anderson later concluded that it was impossible to find the constraint in knowledge work. And that led him to create the Kanban method, and I think also then Dan Vacanti has something to say about that story. But anyway, this thing that Anderson claimed that it was not possible to find the constraint, for me, it was the murder of Herbie. Herbie is the constraint, so he just disappeared. It was really a pivotal moment for me. So I decided to bridge this gap, and I took a master's degree in software project management, trying to find Herbie. I didn't find him anywhere, nothing, nowhere. All the research, I couldn't really find him. And this pushed me to develop my own ideas based on patterns, pattern theory. I first created the TameFlow approach in 2014, and last year, 2024, what I now call flow at scale. So that's the journey now, from my experience at Borland, finding the theory of constraints and patterns, and then this shaped my thinking that eventually became TameFlow.
Thanks, Steve. That's a great overview. Do you, and through all of this journey, let's tee up what do you said, welcome friends of Herbie. For those who don't know who Herbie is or what you're referring to when we talk about finding the constraint in software development, could you give our listeners a little bit of an overview of Herbie?
Well, Herbie is a character in the business novel The Goal of Goldratt, which Dr. Goldratt was the inventor of the theory of constraints. And in his novel, he recounts the story of a troop of Boy Scouts, and Herbie is one of them. And Herbie was the one who was always late, always behind, always lagging. And the story of Herbie is all about discovering the significance of the constraint and especially what to do about that. Now, I won't repeat the story because I've said it so many, many times, but Herbie is the colloquial name of the constraint. And I always say, Herbie is your best friend.
So based on that journey of creating TameFlow and flow at scale, it sounds like you came to a different realization around constraints in software development. Do you think it's possible now to find constraints?
Absolutely, and of course, there is a lot of thinking that goes into this. But to make it very short, the original formulation of the theory of constraints happened, at least in that novel. The original popularization, I should say, of the theory of constraints in that novel happened on the manufacturing floor. So you tend to say, oh yes, that's really quote simple, but someone who says that has never seen a real factory. But you get this idea that it's just moving widgets, and yes, you find the constraint by looking at the largest pile in front of the slowest machine, and there it is. And when you try to transpose this to the world of software, where there is a ton of VUCA, variability, uncertainty, and Mr. Murphy and all his friends said, no, it's impossible. There are just too many moving parts, too many moving things. But there is one thing that actually comes from ProKanban, or I should say from Dan Vacanti, which is this idea of using flow metrics. So the statistics and the probability aspects, because if you replace like the deterministic thinking that you have on the manufacturing floor, or approximately deterministic, and replace that with stochastic statistical measures, you can apply the same logic that you have on the manufacturing floor, but on a probabilistic basis. And that is sufficient to zoom into what the constraint is. And also keep in mind that the constraint is not something in the small. It's not Herbie the programmer in a team. The constraint is with reference to the entire company. So it's this large perspective that we have to keep in mind. And of course, the larger things become, the more significance probabilistic approaches have.
Yeah. And you, Steve, I know in your writing and a lot of the work that you've done, you like to use physics as a metaphor for business performance and moving from complicated models to more simple rules. Why? Let's talk a little bit about that connection between not just TameFlow, but the flow community as a whole. Why do you think that resonates?
That's a wonderful question. So it's not so much the use of physics, but it's more this idea of using metaphors, parables, and stories to convey ideas that might be very hard to grasp. Because many of these concepts that we have in flow, and even more so in constraints management, are totally counterintuitive. But good stories, and especially those that are relatable to the material physical world, can make those concepts like recognizable. Uh, you can connect them to the lived common experience rather than having to do like an intellectual effort and mind somersaults to try to understand something. So all of these stories that I tell, like the story of Herbie, have like a high point, and that's when the listener has that like aha moment. That's when they gain awareness that there is a new perspective, a new idea. It's a seed that is being planted in their minds, and they are ready to explore and develop that idea into something more concrete. Now, I have many more stories than the story of Herbie. So I would just like to give you like a sampler, because some of these you will recognize even from the Kanban vernacular, but others might be unknown. So I just try to go through them like from the more sensible one to the more bizarre. One which I think you know is the relay race. It's known in the Kanban circles. It illustrates the concept of flow efficiency and focus. Another one is the pebble in the shoe, and it illustrates what I call the work execution signals. In the world of Pro Kanban, think of that in terms of the work item aging. But the idea is actually more generic. And if you're on a hike and you get a pebble in your shoe, now after a moment it's an annoyance, then it becomes discomfort, and then it hurts, and you have to stop and take action. And that's what happens with work item aging when it crosses the percentile thresholds. At a certain point, it goes from green to yellow, then from yellow to red, and then you have to intervene. Then I have many stories there. So if you don't want to know about them, don't just interrupt me. We go on with the rest of your questions. But I like these stories. The other one is the patient in the hospital. Now, we've all been in a hospital, right? And it illustrates the difference between wait time and touch time. When you're the patient, you are patient. You are always waiting. And it changes, the story changes the focus from the work to the worker, because the patient is sorry, from the opposite, from the worker to the work, because
Yeah.
the patient in the hospital is the work. Then we have the story of the firefighter brigade, and it shows the necessity of idleness when you need the capacity to handle unexpected and urgent events. And the variation is the Formula One pit stop crew, which is similar to the firefighter story, but it illustrates more this idea that in high performing teams, it's better to have people waiting for work rather than work waiting for people, which is exactly what you need in order to improve flow efficiency. I have another one, which is the team cycling time trial. So now we start to get into those that might be a bit more uncommon. And this is interesting because I use it to illustrate this idea that I call the MOVE, the minimum outcome value effort. Sorry, minimal outcome value effort. It's in project management terms, it's a target scope of work or a work package, but with a twist. There is a threshold, a target. And in a team cycling time trial, now the team is usually made up of 8 or 9 members, but the time of the team is taken on the 4th member. If less members arrive, the team fails the race. If more than 4 members arrive, the time is still taken on the 4th. So this is what you need to keep in mind when you're shifting your attention from outputs to outcomes, because the outcomes always comes in discrete, in quantum steps. They are not continuous and linear. So every 4th cycle takes the time. I have the classical "the boy who cried wolf," which illustrates now the leadership anti-pattern of constantly changing priorities, and at the end nobody cares. because at the next cry, well, it's business as usual and nothing to worry about. I have the rowing coxswain, which illustrates that what team leadership should really focus on, and that is to facilitate high performance through synchronized actions. All these moving parts, they have to somehow move at unison. I have the McDonald's tray, which illustrates the idea of full kitting. You should not release work into the workflow unless it is prepared fully kitting, meaning that you're actively preempting the disturbance of flow. I have the big river, which I use to illustrate the idea of constraints in multi-stream environments. In a big river with multiple affluents, there are many obstacles, rock formations, beaver dams, and so on. Where is the constraint? Well, it's that obstruction that holds back the greatest volume of water. Then I have the jungle, the jeep, and the journey, which, well, is more complicated, but I use it to illustrate the situation of a multi-project product stream environment with multiple teams, multiple stakeholders, the normal mess of companies. And it highlights the difference between the workflow, the work process, and the work execution. And in all those three places, there can be a Herbie. But Colleen, there is one story that more than any other represents this thinking of TameFlow, and it's the famous egg of Columbus. It's probably anecdotal, but it has a crucial lesson. Columbus wanted to find ships for his voyage, and at the court of Spain, he was mocked by the learned philosophers and professors and so on. And he challenged them to make this egg stand upright on a table. They all failed. And he then revealed his method based on his knowledge of the anatomy of the egg and the hydrodynamics of floating objects. What did he do? He took this egg and shake it really, really violently, and this broke the internals of the egg, so that bubble of air that is in the membrane at the bottom was freed and went up, and the yolk, which was attached with two strings, the strings broke and the yolk went down. So the internal physics of the egg changed, and he put it on the table and stood upright. And then he said, and I did this because I possess the knowledge that you lack. Similarly, I have the knowledge to circumnavigate Earth while you do not. This convinced the Queen to grant him the ships. Now, this story, I think, is wonderful because it illustrates that what seems obvious in hindsight is often not self-evident without prior knowledge. And in TameFlow, we encounter similar, outrageous claims. I can make the eggs stand upright. I can circumnavigate the world. That, like Columbus, they seem completely outrageous. But once you understand, they become undeniably true. So remember the story of the egg of Columbus. When you face or hear these claims I might make when I talk about TameFlow, they will be clear in retrospect, but they will seem unbelievable at first glance.
I feel like we're going to need a whole series here of all of these TameFlow fables and stories.
One for every story.
Animated, like an animated series of these, almost like what Carl Scotland did his That's Not My Agile children's book version. We need something like that for all of your stories, Steve.
Well, there is a cartoon version of the goal of Goldratt. So we could take inspiration from that.
We'll put that. I'll make sure we get the link for that in the show notes for this too. Before we talk about economies of flow and get into more about throughput accounting, I see a great question here from Ray that I want to pull in before we move to a slightly different topic. Ray said, you've mentioned that pattern theory is how you structured TameFlow and flow at scale, but you see that as more an internal process and not how you present the material. Is it fair to say that pattern theory has been more useful to you as a thinking process than a teaching or communication tool? And if so, why do you think that is?
No,
just
please,
a small
please.
little question, Steve.
Let's not go into patterns. No, I am a super enthusiast of pattern languages, pattern theory. But the depth of pattern thinking is way beyond what like normal conversation, normal discourse would make you believe. And unfortunately, the word pattern has this common acceptation that everyone thinks they know what a pattern is. And yes, it's the normal meaning of patterns, but it's not the technical mathematical meaning of pattern. So yes, it's true. I used it mostly as an internal tool. Remember that patterns can be used to describe what you're seeing. So you observe and you describe the reality in terms of patterns. But the more powerful use is the opposite. It's to use patterns to design and to design new things by decomposing existing patterns and then recomposing the parts, like the DNA that recombines with new generations. And TameFlow is clearly an example of this. Now, I could give you more detailed examples, but uh, I think this might require a whole lecture.
I was thinking the same thing. We're going to have to point everybody to your TameFlow circle at the end here. So people who are interested in getting more courses or deeper dives in some of this content, especially flow at scale too, can really explore the specific topics that you've gone really deep in through your coursework. Since our topic for today is specifically on economies of flow, let's talk throughput accounting. So can you tell our audience what is throughput accounting and why does it matter?
Well, it's hard to like synthesize a thought that conveys what this is about. But I always like to start from not explain directly what throughput accounting is, but what is the thinking behind it. And I do this in the course by giving like this example of the geocentric and heliocentric view, which was a great shift of perspective. It's a humongous, the history was defined from that shift. It was a monumental change. We had Aristotle and Ptolemy and then Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo, and ultimately we had Newton with his second law of motion. And think about the geocentric models. You must have seen these drawings or models where you have like spheres and spheres in spheres and epicycles and ancillary spheres, armillary spheres. And anytime a new object was discovered in the sky, this whole model collapsed and had to be redesigned from scratch because that new object didn't fit in. And then Newton came along and found this famous formula, F equal ma, 3 letters. And those 3 letters explained everything. And when a new object came about, it was just new data, but the model kept intact. So this 3-letter thing was enormously simple compared to the complexity of all those spheres that the geocentric model implied. And this is known as Newton's inherent simplicity. So we get to throughput accounting with this challenge. Now, could we find something that is equivalent to this equation, F equal ma? And I claim it's possible. And we have to do some parallels here, the stepping stones, because what is the geocentric view, the complex one, where everything is dependent on everything else, and for every new thing you have to redesign all. Well, it's in the industry, we could equate that to the prevalent focus or attendance to resource efficiency, which is decidedly founded like on cost accounting. So we got the accounting word, then I will start looking on the money things, and the justification is, hey, I pay your salary, so you better keep busy, because in that way the resource, or quote, is busy. It's not stealing the salary from me. But then we go over to like an intermediate model, and this was like Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo that started to see the center is somewhere else. It's the sun, and this is the current state where from resource efficiency you go to flow efficiency. And this is where most of the Kanban world is today. But there is yet one more improvement, and this is like going from Kepler and Galileo to Newton. And this is where we will find this simple formula, the equivalent of F equal ma, which tends to throughput efficiency. So now already going from resource to flow efficiency requires a whole change of perspective. It's like going from the geocentric spheres of sphere to the heliocentric, but then going from the heliocentric to the second law of motion, so condensing everything into a single formula is even more counterintuitive. And just as the sun becomes the center of the upgraded model, guess who is at the center of this new model? It's Herbie, of course, the constraint.
Yeah, and let's talk about the constraint piece of this for a moment. In the Economies of Flow course, you talk about how maximizing profits, thinking about it from an economic perspective, maximizing profits often comes down to finding the constraint. Why is that such a hard, you just talked about some of this shift in thinking, but why does that tend to be such a hard shift for leaders to make in thinking about it from that perspective?
Well, first of all, maybe I should state now what is that magic formula, because that magic formula is really simple. We define throughput, and here I have to qualify because it's not the throughput you would normally think about in Kanban, which I usually call the operational throughput. Now we talk about the economic throughput. The economic throughput is the sales price minus totally variable costs. And then you get to the calculation of net profit, which is throughput minus operating expenses. So in short, it's a different way of reorganizing the numbers that you already have in the accountant's spreadsheet. But you said, now, why is this so tricky for leaders? And I think that is correct, because the problem here is that neither common practices nor common management theories actually help you to identify the constraint to begin with. And you need the constraint to be able to make that decision, absorb that model. So it's already a huge challenge in the physical material business world, let alone when we're talking about immaterial, invisible knowledge work, collaborative knowledge work. In all of these situations, the idea is of the constraint is not foreign. Now you understand there is a constraint. For example, Professor Charles Holmgren, the late Professor Charles Holmgren, who was a scholar, professor of accounting at Stanford, and one of the founders of modern management accounting, stated something like the criteria for maximizing profit is to identify the limiting factor and obtain the greatest possible contribution to profit on each unit of this limiting or scarce factor. It sounds great, it's common sense, but how do you find that limiting factor? How do you find Herbie? This is where constraints management comes into play, because without constraints management, you cannot find Herbie. So there's no point talking about the benefits of this superior perspective if you cannot provide a tool to put it in practice. And that's why leaders struggle with this, because they might nod their heads, yes, I understand, but they don't have a clue, and they don't have the tools, and they don't have the mental models to put it into practice. But that's exactly what I address with TameFlow and Flow at Scale.
Well, and Jose teed up a question for you kind of prior to us hopping on this live stream, but I want to read his because I think it fits nicely with what you're talking about here. And Jose asked, what makes it so challenging for performance-focused individuals to persuade leadership to make decisions from a throughput accounting perspective rather than a cost accounting one?
I think it's exactly what I just said, that the leaders at the top, they don't see how to do this. And any argument you can propose from within the organization will be not credible, because in your small, if you're leading a team, a department, a unit, You're expected to be an expert of that. So how can you come to me, I am the CEO, and tell me how I should run the whole business? Because this perspective of throughput economics, throughput accounting, is systems-wide. You have to look, as I said before, find the constraint in the whole system. It's not the constraint in the value stream or the constraint in the team or the bottlenecks, as you might say. So it's this let's say a difference of authoritativeness. Can I use that word? Someone in the middle of the company doesn't have like the stripes, the grade, to be able to talk with credibility about company-wide situations. And therefore, a lot of education needs to be delivered even to top-level management.
Well, and I think for a lot of leaders too, they're very used to looking at profit per unit or profit per widget feature, like you said at the beginning of this, and you really emphasize shifting that to profit over time. Why is the time dimension so critical to this way of measuring?
Well, let's start with resource efficiency, the normal situation of most companies. Attention is all about costs, and costs are established in a very deterministic manner. They look at the past, basically, and striving to maximize profits under like that mind frame is very straightforward. It's basically arithmetic. Besides the fact that you're not maximizing profits at all, as you will understand once you see what throughput economics is about, you have a huger problem. And it is in what happens when you move from this resource efficiency perspective to the flow efficiency perspective, because this perspective becomes much more dynamic. You start to realize that it's a system wherein things flow, and it flows also, by definition, things move in the time dimension. What is here today was over there yesterday, and hopefully will be over down there tomorrow. So it's this movement of stuff through space and time, and you intuitively like understand that if something slows down this movement or even blocks the movement, well, it's not good. At the end, if the deliverable doesn't come out of the system, the customer won't buy and won't pay. So you have this dynamic aspect which does not exist in the resource efficiency cost accounting perspective. And striving to improve flow efficiency requires that managers become much more aware of what happens in real time. And this is why I always refer, the most important part of everything in and like this like umbrella term of TameFlow for the operational flow is execution management. It becomes paramount. And Pro-Kanban is one of the very few approaches, of course, in addition to TameFlow and Flow at Scale, that makes this explicit by giving attention to the work item age. And I think it's not a coincidence that Dan Vacanti stated that if he were to pay attention to only one thing, it would be work item age. It's so important. And this is good, but it's not enough, because even if a manager gets this, he cannot connect it to the bottom line. So this is where you need this additional perspective to go from flow to throughput efficiency. And by the way, I claim that Pro-Kanban practitioners have an unfair advantage because they have already done this first perspective upgrade, while the whole industry is still down there in the resource efficiency paradigm. So you have a head start. You're far ahead of most of the industry. But
I didn't pay Steve to say that either. That was that was your own endorsement. Well, I think that so in the throughput economic side of things, you've often said that this can replace a lot of the messiness of KPIs with one clear measure, which is throughput rate, like you're describing here. I see a question here in the chat too. What other metrics would you recommend for quantifying economies of flow in a non-manufacturing organization?
Well, this is connected to this KPI things. Well, I would say that if you understand the significance of this second law of motion kind of simplifying equation, you might not care about other KPIs. Now, let me expand this, because now this is quite a question, quite an important topic. Now, throughput economics has a very powerful shift when you are looking like at multiple KPIs, and often conflicting KPIs, because all of these KPIs with the throughput perspective can be condensed into this one single thing that I call the throughput rate. And basically, it's in Kanban, when you talk about throughput, the operational throughput, it's work items over time. So it's a measurement of speed. It's a rate. In throughput economics, the numerator is a dollar sign. It's how many dollars you make over time. So that is the mindset. Why is this important? Because the dollar sign is something that affects all companies. Now, every department has budgets, and budgets are given in dollars or euros. So it's money that is the lingua franca, the common language across all these silos and organizational boundaries. But within those silos, companies tend to measure different things. And when there is something new, they invent a new KPI. Doesn't this sound like the geocentric model, that when a new celestial body is found, we invent a new sphere, and then we have to figure out how it fits into all the others? But there is a lot of stuff to dissect here. So what changes when a company makes this shift towards throughput economics? Well, first of all, besides that the profits improve dramatically, when you focus on the flow of value, dollars, through the system's constraint, well, you will also realize the conditions that I was seeking from the outset, the conditions that cause the unity of purpose. In the course, I give an example of when there are partial interests that are clashing in a conflicting manner over a seemingly very simple and innocent problem, which is to decide which product should you go and sell. And the conventional resource efficiency accounting world will say, well, of course, the product with the highest unit profit. But this immediately also creates this jungle of conflicting KPIs, because you will have the sales team that will maybe push another product because they have higher sales commissions. Accounting wants one product, sales wants another product. And then you have the production. They might be pushing a third product because their resource utilization figures are higher. So we have three perspectives under the same company, and they are all fighting against each other. So KPIs are creating enemies within, with all these disparate goals. Things that seem logical in isolation and in the silo become, how can we say, they lead to hidden agendas, internal conflicts, and they undermine the company's overall profitability and cohesion. But now, what happens? What happens when you start using throughput economics? Well, first of all, now let me give you like 3 or 4 examples. First of all, you are eliminating a lot of conflicts. The inherent conflicts that are arising from these different KPIs, which are pulling in different directions, you will start to go in the same direction. As I say, the conflicts evaporate. You get this unified purpose because there is a singular focus on that figure, throughput rate, for the entire company. And having this unity of purpose is so much powerful than every and every department chasing their own KPIs. We eliminate all these hidden agendas, internal politics. On a more strategic level, you have like optimized decision making, because when you have like these large questions, now what product should we produce, or selection, you are not basing the decision on partial interest or misleading metrics. You are grounded on this like overall impact. And finally, it's a matter of like strategic investment. One major error that most companies do is that, well, no, they spread the budget all over the place and improve everywhere, hoping that the overall system will improve. But the insight of constraints management is that the majority of those investments are totally wasted, because it's only on the constraint that you need to invest. It's only by increasing the capacity of the constraint that you will get this overall effect. So multiple KPIs are really poison. They create enemies, and if you can get rid of them, you won't be missing them. Let's put it that way.
And focus, you said, on unity of purpose, right? Around that,
Correct.
that one metric. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I want to make sure we can open this up for questions from our audience too. So if you have any questions for Steve, feel free to add those to the chat now. But as we're collecting some more questions for you, if a leader was listening to this today and they wanted to start experimenting with economies of flow, what's the first step they should take?
Well, start to look beyond the resource efficiency paradigm. Start learning about flow efficiency. Take all the ProKanban classes, or learn the fundamentals of flow metrics, because that's the base even for TameFlow. Now, I always say, want to learn flow metrics, go to Dan and ProKanban. ProKanban teaches that much better than I could ever imagine. But as I said before, bootstrap using execution management through the work item aging. It's the simplest thing you can do to start getting into this, and learn how to, let's say, scale the flow across the entire organization. And then when you are there, when you are having things that flow inside the organization, that's when you can start looking into the throughput efficiency, into the economies of flow in particular. And by that, I mean, take my course there, Profit Booster, the economies of flow. And I think you, Colleen, will say something about that soon, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll cover the course here at the end, and how people can join the course if they're interested in doing a deeper dive on these concepts. Christian posted a question for us in Slack yesterday too, that I think fits nicely with this idea around the first step. But he asked, what is, in your opinion, what's the most crucial mistake that most companies make, and how would you address it?
Crucial mistake. Well, I'm not keen on talking about mistakes or misconceptions. There are simply too many. But let me give you like a more sensible reply. Now, it's going back like to the founding principle, which relates to these perspectives that I've been talking about during this presentation. More technically, I like to consider them as mental models. The things we have in our mind that shape our understanding of the world and drive our decision making. Some mental models are better than others. But then how do I define better? Well, here is another aspect of TameFlow. Now, TameFlow is called like that because I attend to 4 flows: the operational flow, the economic flow, the flow of information, and lastly, psychological flow. So this pertains to psychological flow. A mental model is better if it caters more to your self-interest. Your self-interest. Self-interest is paramount in all the TameFlow thinking. It's not only your self-interest, but it's also the self-interest of all other people in the company. What would you prefer? Like this perspective, the mental model, based on resource efficiency, where everyone is fighting against everyone else with all the KPIs in defense of their partial interests, or a perspective like the one on throughput efficiency, where everyone shares the same deep interest, doesn't drain time and energy in endless debates and conflicts and hidden agendas, and where the personal and collective prosperity is better warranted today and in the future because we are all in the same boat. I know which one I would pick. And you?
Yeah. Well, and Hector's got a great follow-on to that question, Steve. He said, do you think that overcoming the resource efficiency paradigm would necessitate a restructuring of the organization to foster the new paradigms systematically?
Restructuring? No. So now this is a tricky one. This is really a tricky one. So there is one thing we didn't quite mention, because when you talk about these transformations, I have another term I prefer. It's elevation. It comes from the story of Furby. One step is elevate. We have been conditioned by all the experience in these last 20 years or so that these transformations are painful. They cost a lot, and it's the risk of failure is large. People get affected by change fatigue and so on. Now, I think it's really important talking about these mental models that make you make different decisions. Many of these amazing profitability improvements that you gain through flow efficiency and throughput efficiency actually come for free if you know what you're doing. Now, this sounds like one of those outrageous claims, I know, but remember the story of the egg of Columbus. In one of the first examples I gave in the course, I show that it's a school book example, Sonar, but it's illustrative. It shows that you get like a 59% improvement on daily net profit for free. Because to get there, you do not spend any money, like no new investments, purchasing new equipment, no new staffing, hiring new people, no new assets, buying new office space, no new restructuring, putting new management structures in place, no reorganization, moving to new premises, no retraining, no overtime, no extra data information, market benchmarks. In short, you get this plus 59% on daily net profit for free. And how is this achieved? Only by looking at the problems from a different perspective, from the geocentric to the heliocentric model, and making critical decisions on the basis of these newfound mental models. So the cost is really an intellectual and emotional one of top management. And there we go back to what I just said before. You need to, how can we say, stimulate the self-interest of top management so that they see the benefits of this and understand that the material costs are next to nothing compared to these, enormous transformation, safe transformation. After 5 years, you're still wondering, when does the effect come, right?
Yeah. And the cost, right? The cost, like you said, the cost of those investments in retraining or changing staff, changing roles, changing organizational structure comes at a pretty, there's a lot of dollar signs attached to this.
There is, and it's not only like the drain and the cost, but it's the psychological cost for the people involved. I seldom see companies who are doing safe where everyone is, yeah, hello, let's do it again. It was so nice. No, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Jennifer asked the question, could you clarify the inputs and values that make up the throughput economics formula one more time? And maybe as you do that, Steve, if we could point people to a place where they might be able to find that as a reference after the show?
Well, it's sales minus totally variable costs. What is a total variable cost? It's for every unit that you sell, you're incurring a cost. From that, you subtract the operating expenses. What is the operating expense? It's anything you're spending every day to keep the lights on. And that difference is basically your net profit. Now, the thing that maybe we didn't quite underline before, now we were saying that the cost accounting perspective in pursuit of optimizing performance can do that in a very deterministic way and just use simple arithmetic. What we are looking at here are rates. Remember, I said that we are going from operational throughput, work items over time, to economic throughput, which is dollars over time. Since we are dividing by time, this is obviously a rate. It's a speed of generation of money. And therefore, the simplistic arithmetic that you use when doing the cost accounting exercise for optimizing profit has to be replaced with something that is more similar to calculus, because you are doing differentials in rate. You look at how is the rate of operating expenses. This is what we have to spend every day just to keep alive, compared to the rate of generation of sales. That difference in between, that is your net profit. And of course, now what you want to do is to increase that rate so that you get more bacon on the table. I don't know if that explains it.
I think so, yeah. And Susan, hopefully that answered your question. I think, Steve, you said the profit metric improvement is net profit, not gross profit. Is that correct?
It's net profit defined, as we say in the throughput accounting equation, yes. Because then you can very easily fall down the trap of starting classifying costs as you do as a cost accountant. But that's not what we do. We just make the distinction between totally variable costs and anything else that keeps the lights on, including salaries, is operating expenses. You don't do anything like cost allocations, which goes back to the unit profit calculation. To have unit profits, you must know the unit cost. That does not make sense when you start looking at rates, because you must always pay the salaries, no matter if they are producing things that get sold, or they are just sitting there waiting for the next order.
Yeah. And Michael, you had a question here about work itemizing. I'm not sure what the question was, Steve. I don't know if you remember what you said about work itemizing.
I don't remember that time.
Yeah, if you'd like to rephrase that question for Steve, we'll go ahead and squeeze that one in here at the end. But as we come to a close here, I want to make sure we talk about the Economies of Flow course that you have available on Circle, on the TameFlow Circle setup. So can you tell our folks a little bit about the course and where they might be able to learn more about the class itself? And then we can talk a little bit about next steps.
Well, in general, everything that I do is on the Circle, which you find at circle.tameflow.com. And there you will also find my courses. And one of the latest is this one that I call the Profit Booster, the Economies of Flow. The motivation to create this course was really to help people understand that there is this different way of looking at how the company makes money. And the course is relating to the things that we have said tonight. Goes through the first half, where we look at the economic reasons to adopt flow. In short, the things that ProCamban is teaching. So the flow efficiency paradigm, but how does that flow efficiency turn into bottom line impact without all those costs that we just mentioned? And I give an example where there is an initial impression. If you just know about Kanban, the initial impression is, you get plus 23%, which is great because the alternative would be a loss. But in reality, that could be a multiplier, like net profit times 3. And this only with the flow efficiency paradigm. Then we go into, well, let's look where Herbie really is, because if you can achieve that improvement without caring about Herbie, it's not that Herbie is not affecting you, it's always there, and that's really important. But you get that like net profit multiplied by 3 uh, uh, only by applying the ideas of flow efficiency. Then we say, okay, now let's find Herbie and let's invest on Herbie, not on the rest. So focused investment. And I show you how this would give you like an additional net profit times 2. In total, net profit times 5. Now, that is an outrageous claim, but if you start understanding how these mental models work, you, at the end of the course, you will say, okay, maybe it will not be times 5 in practice, but it will be way beyond any most rosy imaginable dream that you might have on how to improve profitability. And that's just the power of constraints management and throughput economics. So it's really a tutorial course. It intends to be an eye opener so people understand what this is about. Because often, or even if I've written about these things in my books, um, people read and it's just they get over it and don't really grasp the essence of the message. So here I've tried to be very clear and make the examples very piecemeal, one bit after the other, so you can appreciate how this idea, this mental model, slowly builds up, and then you say, oh no, it's not the geocentric model, it's the heliocentric model that matters. But Colleen, you took the course. What can you say about it?
Yes, well, I loved the course because it did make me think about all of these things in a slightly different way, and especially the way the current economic climate looks, not just in the US, but abroad. I think everyone is trying to figure out how can we gain these improvements without having to let folks go, reduce headcount. If our goal is to increase profit without losing people or cutting corners, how do we do that in a way that is responsible, right? And I think at the end of the day, that's where everybody is right now. So I loved the course, and I'm very excited to announce that ProKanban is going to be partnering with TameFlow to build out a assessment for the Profit Booster course. So if you're interested in taking the course and the assessment, we'll have those assessments on the ProKanban website later this month or next month. I guess it's pretty much October at this point. So in October, we'll be launching these assessments for the Economies of Flow and Profit Booster. So you can take the course and then come onto the ProKanban website if you are interested in getting certified to test your knowledge and prove out your learning there. So more to come on that. I want to thank you, Steve, for being part of Kanban for Everyone today. I feel like we could have spent a whole nother hour on this specific topic. So I want to thank everyone for joining us live and asking great questions for Steve. If you have topics you'd like to see us continue this conversation on or go deeper on, feel free to add them in the chat or reach out to us in Slack or on Circle. We're happy to keep this conversation going. And hopefully we'll hear from some of you once that assessment is up and running, and you can tell us if we made it hard enough or not. That's always the first question we get. How hard is it? So thank you to everybody who joined us today. This will be published to LinkedIn. So if you'd like to share it with any of your colleagues afterwards, we'll have the full recording posted there. We'll be back October 21st with Steve Pereira from Flow Engineering, talking about some of his content and sharing more of his stories from the field with all of you in October. So thanks again for joining today. Thank you so much, Steve, for sharing all of your experiences with us, and definitely go check out that Economies of Flow Profit Booster class in Circle. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And remember, Herbie is your best friend. Bye.